Welcome everyone, and thank you very much for joining this afternoon's webinar. It's a very exciting 2 hours, I guess, for everyone who's been involved in the making of the water governance standard. And so just a few quick thank yous to start with. So Water has worked really hard at this putting this standard together along with their sister organization W-CReS, and gratitude to IDH for the support that they have given us to put this book together and this event as well. So thanks very much for coming together to collaborate on this very critical publication. So I'm not going to talk much about the publication because Crispin, you're going to do so. The panelists will speak about it themselves, and all the authors are here, on board this panel and on this webinar to talk about their work. So I won't speak much about that, but huge thanks to all our keynote speakers, and we have 4 very eminent keynote speakers to share their thoughts with us and give us directions for our way forward. And it's absolutely fantastic to have such an illustrious group of people to speak in as keynotes. We'll after that go ahead and launch the book. It's going to be distributed as an ebook to start with. If anyone wants a hard copy, that too can be made available. But in today's day, when paper is is frowned upon, it's probably best to just ask for an e-copy, and you'll have many ways of downloading that and reading that at your leisure. After that, we're going to have a panel discussion, and all our panelists are already on board, and that's going to be moderated by Dr. Alok Sikka, who also is here in the audience right away. So without further ado, I'm going to kick off by the introductions of our keynote speakers. Our first keynote speaker is Mr. Mukund Rajan, who has had many years of experience, over 20 years of working with the Tata Group. Right now, he's chairman of ECube Investment Advisors, a firm that really works on ESG and catalyzing ESG into the corporate world. And that's a very important and critical area for the corporate world, and in fact for society as a whole, for us to be accountable for our ESG actions. And he leads in this space. Apart from a whole host of other publications, he recently published a book which is again relevant in the ESG space, because it talks about how ESG can benefit your business, and appropriately it is called Outlast. So Mukund, thank you very much for joining, and over to you to deliver your keynote address to us. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Malini. And let me first start by congratulating the Watershed Organisation Trust and its Centre for Resilient Studies on the production of this very timely and important document on water governance standards. I'm no expert in water, but I do know something is just mentioned about ESG in the corporate sector. So I'm going to spend a lot of my time over the next 12 minutes really talking about that. As you know, I spent many years in the corporate sector, particularly with the Tata Group, and I can vouch for the value that such frameworks to guide behavior really have. So in my address today, what I'd like to do is to link what you all are trying to do with these standards to some observations from my time with the Tatas. I will also dwell on the emerging thematic of ESG, which you mentioned, or environment, social, and governance, which is beginning to significantly shape corporate behavior in India. And I'd like to suggest that the focus on sensible water management is becoming an essential element of the ESG thematic, and therefore these standards can become a very valuable tool in the hands of corporates. So in the Tatas, the Tata Business Excellence Model was something that was created in the wake of economic liberalization and the new challenge posed by multinational companies that were entering India in the early 1990s. And much like your model permits across villages, the Tata model allowed Tata companies to baseline their performance across a range of parameters, benchmark with each other and their peers in industry, identify best practices in India and overseas, and set aspirational targets for continuous improvement. And many commentators, and certainly I include myself in that group, would ascribe the Tata's success over the next 2 decades, the fact that even today it retains its #1 status in India, with a brand that enjoys the highest brand equity valuation for any Indian corporate brand, to the work that was done at that time and continues under the aegis of the Tata Business Excellence Model framework. My next observation from the Tatas relates to the role of the community central to water management and the connect that this has with the ESG thematic. The founder of the Tata Group, Jamsetji Tata, believed that in a free enterprise, the community is not just another stakeholder in business, but is in fact the very purpose of its existence. And this belief that to have a successful business, you need successful customers, successful lenders, successful investors, successful employees, and indeed a successful community is one that is now becoming a widely accepted mantra for business success. And a modern standard of corporate responsibility is now emerging across the world, predicated on value creation for all stakeholders. And this approach to corporate responsibility is increasingly being captured in the ESG thematic. And that is now being driven by the convergence, I see, of several factors. So on the environmental dimension, I think the COVID pandemic and the growing frequency of extreme climatic events caused by global warming, which of course has a significant interplay with the water crisis, have both opened humankind's eyes to the global impact created when the balance with nature is upset, and the fact that when nature revolts, there is nowhere to hide. On the social dimension, we see concerns about growing inequality and social unrest associated with this. Around the world, we are today witnessing the largest number of violent conflicts since the Second World War, and a growing number of these conflicts are increasingly attributed to water scarcity and unequal access to water. And finally, on the governance dimension, we are seeing a leadership vacuum in a crisis-ridden global economy, and it is this governance failure that a somewhat helpless UN Secretary General some weeks back pointed to in Egypt at the climate conference when he said, and I quote, "We are on a highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator," unquote. There is an expectation, therefore, that a large and growing number of stakeholders from civil society, the judiciary, government, regulators, customers, and investors have that businesses need to do more to address environmental and social challenges and play a constructive role in balancing the interests of all their stakeholders. And that is what we are now beginning to see the most forward-looking businesses in India do. And across a range of ESG metrics, which include water management, they are stepping up to show how they manage risk, create resilience in their operations, and also seek business opportunities within the evolving ESG landscape. So let me try and illustrate this point in more detail. The examples of ESG commitment shown by Indian businesses, I believe, presage the role that growing numbers of Indian businesses will play in addressing ESG issues like the water crisis. A number of India's leading businesses have now begun to address the climate change issue, which is of course compounding the water crisis. Many are embracing net zero commitments. An example is India's largest private sector company, oil and gas major Reliance Industries, which has set a target to become net carbon zero by 2035. They're putting in place the right governance structures to develop and execute ESG strategies. And increasing numbers of companies like Infosys and Airtel have now created dedicated ESG committees of their boards. And they are also now assigning responsibility within the senior management team on a dedicated basis for ESG and sustainability. Many of these forward-looking businesses also recognize that little of lasting value gets created unless you secure the buy-in of local communities. And towards this end, in India, they are leveraging their CSR spending obligations to become neighbors of choice, investing in the future of local communities through interventions such as watershed development and conservation activities. And in line with the importance they attach to governance within their own organizations, they value community leadership that helps to sustain for the long term the interventions they might make. These businesses are placing significant focus on resource use efficiency and circular economy practices that minimize the consumption of resources like water and reduce the generation of waste. In their capital investment planning, progressive businesses are attaching a relevant cost to natural resources, including water and carbon. And in the future, we see such exercises also being informed by the emerging recommendations of the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, or TNFD. These businesses are constantly innovating and pivoting their business models to find competitive advantage. To take one more example for the Tatas, a company like Tata Power, when it found itself at the receiving end of portfolio decarbonization initiatives by major investors, it chose to pivot towards renewable energy and away from coal-fired thermal power. And of course, we know that coal-fired thermal and thermal power plants is a huge consumer of water in India. And we are seeing major innovations in a number of new areas which impinge on water. So think of green hydrogen, more water and energy efficient agricultural techniques, and carbon capture and storage. They say that what gets measured gets improved. Linking senior executive compensation to ESG outcomes forces the pace of change. And so we are seeing ESG leaders like Mariko now linking ESG performance on critical issues like water stewardship and carbon emission reduction to executive compensation. Integral to the link with compensation is a strong focus on measurement and monitoring of ESG parameters that are material to operations, tracking performance over time and making transparent disclosures. Now in India, we have the Business Responsibility and Sustainability Report that the Securities and Exchange Board of India, the market regulator, has mandated from this year for the top 1,000 listed companies. This will offer a valuable tool for Indian businesses to communicate their ESG commitment. And the detailed guidelines that SEBI has put out for the preparation of the BRSR reports, as a result of those disclosures by companies, will be scrutinized quite intently by a very varied set of stakeholders, which will include the regulator, of course, but also ESG rating firms, analysts, proxy firms, activists, the media, and others. And I think you can expect both naming and shaming, as well as withdrawal of investments by investors when aberrations are particularly egregious. Forward-looking businesses, in their own interest, are therefore now beginning to engage openly and transparently with these stakeholders. They're educating them about the ESG issues that are relevant to their businesses and the value potential of their pro-ESG behaviors. So very much in the spirit of the water governance standards, forward-looking businesses understand that ESG indicators are becoming a critically important measure of performance. They are architecting strategies that span the material ESG factors that impact their businesses. They're putting in place the right governance, linking performance incentives to ESG outcomes, and they're transparently engaging with all their stakeholders and taking their feedback with a view to further improvement. The management of water is one of the critical elements within this thrust towards better ESG performance. And forward-looking businesses are deploying a host of actions for a more water-resilient future, from trying to price water better, to looking for guidance on natural resource conservation, to leveraging their CSR funds, and engaging with local communities to deploy sensible natural resource management practices. And as the science keeps getting better, they are seeking better measurement tools to make it easier for them to focus on what matters to communities and where their financial and technical interventions can have the greatest impact. These are all the areas where the water governance standards and the ratings and certification toolkit become extremely important. Let me conclude now with a brief comment on the use of measures in the toolkit on water governance standards that point to investment attractiveness. Now, any investment of time and effort tends to be measured by businesses and the corporate world in easy to understand monetary terms. What they're able to measure, they then seek to improve. So as long as the toolkit does not become an instrument for ignoring needy and underprivileged communities in their quest for support, its use of investment attractiveness as a way to benchmark potential interventions does appear logical to me. But I imagine there'll be a lot more debate on this issue later this afternoon. So I'm going to end on that note. by once again congratulating the team responsible for producing this very valuable document. I think many businesses and corporates are going to find it extremely helpful in their pursuit of more water resilient futures. And I wish all of you every success in deploying your talents in the cause of improving water stewardship in India. So thank you for having me, and thank you very much. Good luck to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mukund. And you're absolutely right. ESG is really the way forward for people to report on what they're doing, but certainly also to cast an eye on their actions to see how responsible they should be, and to measure that as well. So thank you very much for throwing a light on that very important element. I hope you're going to stay on for the rest of the afternoon, because there are some other very interesting speakers. Our next speaker is Mr. Adrian Sim, who's the Chief Executive of AWS, which is the Alliance for Water Stewardship, which too has a very, very important water stewardship guidelines and standards. And in fact, the water governance standards that water has established follow it really in the wake of the AWS standards, which are global standards as well. So Adrian has led this organization for the last 11 years, and he's really grown this organization, and to make it even more relevant today than when he started, I guess, because water has become even more critical in this last decade. He's had extensive international experience, ranging from Fair Trade International in Germany to grassroots NGOs in Nepal and Bangladesh and other parts of South Asia. His diverse experience, along with his academic background, he has a master's in international policy and diplomacy, have helped to shape his views that address key global challenges that we are facing right now, and which require leadership, fresh leadership from all stakeholder groups. So Adrian, thank you very much for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Malini. I'd like to begin by first echoing Mukund's congratulations to all the water team for what is a really important initiative, the Water Governance Standard. So as Malini said, I have had the pleasure, honour of leading AWS, the Alliance for Water Stewardship, for quite some years now, since we got established, and the centre piece of our work is the AWS standard. And I thought it would be useful for me to spell out some of our experience from the journey that we have been on, specifically why voluntary standards emerge, what role they have to play, and some of our lessons that hopefully can be helpful in the successful rollout of the Water Governance Standard. So first, some context. AWS is a market-based system with the AWS standard, a voluntary standard at its heart. That means that we work within markets to drive positive change. And we do that by performing three key roles. The first is a convening role, where we bring together our members from different interest groups to build capacity, to share knowledge, and to advance best practice. The second is to use that multi-stakeholder membership to define the essential elements of good water stewardship. These elements are contained within the AWS standard. And the last core function that we play is to provide a system of recognition through which those who meet the requirements of the standard, as evidenced through third-party certification processes, to enable them to make credible claims on good water stewardship performance. Now, these three roles reflect the essential elements of most voluntary standard schemes. In other words, bringing together affected stakeholders, building consensus on what good looks like, and providing a means of assessment to enable credible claims to be made. Now, there are many voluntary standards, in particular in relation to the sustainable production of commodities, the management of natural resources. These standards have emerged to fill a gap between what governments can achieve through policy and regulation and the sustainability needs that have been identified by stakeholders. One way of viewing such standards is as support mechanisms for regulators. In other words, regulators or regulation defines the minimum performance level for compliance with the law. Voluntary standards provide an incentive to move beyond that minimum requirement to advance best practice. So essentially, governments define policies, translate those into regulation, and task regulators with ensuring enforcement. Now, this works fine as long as there is not excessive pressure on the resource in question, and as long as the authorities have the necessary capacity to do their jobs effectively. In the context of water in India, however, there is excessive pressure on the resource. The demands of water resources are increasing, exacerbated, of course, by climate change, and therefore there is a need for additional tools that engage water users in the sustainable management of water resources. The work of Elinor Ostrom, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, showed that by engaging users of a resource in developing rules on its sustainable management, we can actually achieve better outcomes than simply through regulation. And this work from Elinor Ostrom provides some of the key theoretical underpinnings of voluntary standard schemes, including AWS. In our case, the AWS standard seeks to engage what we term major water users, by which I am referring to businesses that use and consume large volumes of water in their operations or supply chains. The theory behind our approach is that if business is given an incentive to improve their water performance, this can help deliver shared benefits for all who rely on the same resource. That incentive essentially boils down to having the ability to make credible claims on good water stewardship performance. Why do businesses want to make credible claims? This relates very much to Mukund's remarks on ESG, is because through these claims, they seek to influence certain audiences. They seek to demonstrate that they are good, trustworthy companies who can instill confidence in the audiences that are important to them. Those audiences might be consumers, they might be investors, it could be a wide range of audiences, but it's communicating confidence to those audiences. But voluntary standards can be much more than vehicles simply do provide incentives. Important though this function is, perhaps more than anything else, if they are developed and managed in an inclusive and sensitive way, standards can provide safe places for different groups to come together, identify common ground and shared goals. So for us, the AWS standard target audience is one group of major water users, businesses. But these businesses don't exist in a vacuum. They're not the only major water users in a catchment. In the Indian context, rural communities, certainly as a collective unit, would be another a group of major water users. So our standard tries to plug this gap between businesses and communities by requiring positive engagement in water governance in the catchment which the site that is implementing the standard is situated. Essentially, it's requiring that business to understand stakeholder perspectives in that catchment and to contribute to the shared challenges that have been identified. Very specifically, somebody's calling me. Very specifically, our standard requires the user to participate positively in catchment governance. That's the words from the standard. But if you ask a site manager in, let's say, a food factory or a paper mill to engage in catchment governance, you're likely to be met with, at best, a look of bemusement. Their job, their area of competence is to make food, to make paper, to make profit for their shareholders, not to engage in catchment governance. So they need support to be able to do that effectively. And this is where the complementarity between the AWS standard and the water governance standard, I think, is very clear. Having communities engaged and motivated to contribute to good water governance gives businesses something to lock into and avoids the risk of parallel efforts. If the water governance standard is successful in motivating communities and the AWS standard is successful in motivating businesses, then both communities and businesses will be pulling in the same direction. So I think in theory, the Water Governance Standard and the AWS Standard are very much aligned and very much complementary. In addition, the Water Governance Standard should help state government agencies to make informed choices regarding investment in and support for communities facing water challenges. And it does that by providing confidence that those investments will deliver their intended return. More than this, the Water Governance Standard should provide confidence to the finance sector, whose capital will be needed to implement those choices. And if we distill the value of voluntary standards down to its essence, it is this thing called confidence that we're left with. Voluntary standards are used only if the implementer, in this case, communities, can see that by doing so, they will be able to communicate confidence to audiences or audiences they seek to influence. For the standard scheme owner, in this case, it's water, this means that you need to understand and develop an effective means of engagement with both the intended user of the standard, communities, and also those who communities seek to influence. And that audience of who communities seek to influence, that will differ from place to place, and it will change and shift over time. So perhaps one of the useful lessons is that we can pass on from our experiences is that the success of a standard scheme depends as much on the strategy through which it is promoted as it does on the standard itself. And that different audiences want different things, and it's important to be continually testing and checking the assumptions on which the theory of change of the standard is built. Both of these apply to communities who we hope to embrace the standard, and to the investors and the financiers and others who we think that communities are interested in influencing. And I can perhaps illustrate what I mean by using an example from the global water stewardship community, of which we are a key part at the AWS. That is the range of organizations that are interested in promoting sustainable industrial water use. That community has long identified institutional investors and the financial sector as a key audience that can unlock scaled adoption of water stewardship. The theory goes something like this, that if evidence of good practice is incorporated into due diligence processes from finance institutions or investors, then companies will be lining up to adopt good water stewardship, because that will ease the pathway to the finance and the investment that they need. Now, that sounds good, and it may be true, but to date, we have had only limited success in persuading investors and financiers that this is what they should do. That doesn't mean it won't happen. It simply means it hasn't happened yet. But it's important to recognize this truth of where different audiences are in their appreciation of the issues we're addressing, is to recognize that truth in any strategy to drive adoption. That might seem self-evident, and probably is self-evident, but there are no shortage of things in this world that have been developed by the non-profit sector that assume that everybody's going to be interested because it is a good thing. But when you seek to engage markets, these assumptions may not hold water. So some advice from our side to water would be to be very, very clear on who you seek to engage, either to use a standard or who the users of the standard seek to engage, and develop a very clear strategy to do so. Part of that strategy is being very clear on the value that the water governance standard will provide those different audiences, and continually check that that perceived value is indeed shared by the audience that you're trying to reach. And in closing, I think it's worth remembering that certification or other forms of assurance are primarily communication tools. In a nutshell, it's about claims that can be made in relation to the standard. Ensuring that those claims are accurate, are truthful, and credible is a task in itself, but it's an essential task if those claims are to be able to deliver the objective of building confidence in key audiences. So it's a fantastic initiative to develop this work. I congratulate everybody involved and wish you all the best, and we'll be behind you and supporting you as the water governance standard is rolled out from here. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Adrian. That was very, very interesting. And really the Alliance for Water Stewardship has shown the way, so for collaboration in this space. And as you said, in these last few years, the need for responsible stewardship has only grown. And to use a horrible pun, the situation is quite fluid. So we'll have to continue. We'll have to continue to collaborate and to learn and to find our way through, through these, to build pathways really, to understand how we can continue to, to work in this sector more responsibly and with greater due diligence. Thank you very much. And I'm sure Water will be very delighted to continue to collaborate with you on these efforts. Our next speaker is Amit Chandra. And, so as they say that there is no planet B, but we have two A's. We have, so we don't have two B's, but we have two A's. So Amit Chandra has two lives. He leads two lives. On the one hand, he's a very, very active corporate leader, chairman of Bain Capital in India. But equally, and as importantly, in fact, perhaps more importantly, he also leads and fronts many philanthropic efforts across the country. And through the ATE, through the ATE Chandra Foundation, he and his wife Archana have led several initiatives where they're helping to develop the social sector through capacity building and also through sustainable rural development efforts. And water has been, I think, a passion for Amit and Archana for the longest time now. So Amit, over to you to hear your experiences and your keynote on this very important subject. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Malini, for that generous introduction. Distinguished speakers at this important summit, all stakeholders interested in this important cause of water who have joined together today, and the amazing team at WOTR and W-CReS. It's indeed a pleasure to be with all of you today. I would like to start by actually thanking Crispino and the team for inviting me to the launch of this important book and this discussion on how we can move forward towards creating an investment smart rural water sector. Many of you have actually dedicated most of your lives to this important cause. As Malini mentioned, I have spent some time, but it's only about a decade working in rural areas on this issue. And so I will base my comments drawing from that experience and also from the book. I would like to start by making the point that solutions to problems only start with their recognition at a wide scale at some tipping point. So the good news is that large segments of key stakeholders now fully recognize that water security is actually one of the biggest crises of our times. And so we are not really starving it of any resources. And I think this was evident from the massive allocation to this area in the recently announced union budget. I might add that it's something completely missed out by the media. The issue, therefore, in my view, is not the awareness of the resources, but consistency of the awareness and how the resources are actually used. And that is where the topic of the day, evolving an approach that is investment smart rural water sector management, becomes actually paramount. Let me elaborate on both these points and start with actually the issue of consistency of awareness. Now, a society is actually plagued with many issues which compete to get onto the top of the agenda of the government, be it at the center or states. Water security is fortunately not one of them. This is manifested by a few simple facts. Work on water is being done at a mission mode and is promoted by less than the Prime Minister himself. Arguably, it's one of the top 3 missions of this government over the past 9 years. Even for many state governments, water has become one of the top 3 or 4 focus issues. And as I pointed out earlier, allocations to this area have actually dramatically surged over the last few years. And the budget of the Jal Shakti Ministry this year will be close to 100,000 crores. So then the question really is, how do our rural communities feel about the seriousness of the water crisis? Now, I would hazard a guess to say that our policyholders, our communities also recognize the seriousness of the crisis. However, while the government can actually act in a very direct fashion via policy, a program, or a mission, my own experience has been that the big problem we face at the community level is that of the lack of coordinated action. In the absence of this, individual responsibility tends to define the norm. Let me elaborate. Given groundwater is a common resource connected by a network of aquifers, the only way to preserve it is actually via coordinated action. If one set of farmers actually decide to behave irresponsibly by drawing extra water or by simply making wrong crop choices, as we see all the time in drought-prone areas, it actually impacts anyone else who actually chooses to behave responsibly. So demand-side management in rural areas is perhaps the single most important thing that can be done at the community level to ensure we have water security in a sustainable manner. In the absence of all of this, the race to then preserve self-interest is a race to the bottom, and it hurts everyone in a village. Now, this requires leadership to bring everybody together and respect water as a precious commodity. And this is also why model villages, which get touted all the time, Ralegaon Siddhi, Hirve Bazaar, have actually been very tough to replicate. And I will touch upon how there may be models to change this. The next issue is how financial and physical resource can actually be used optimally. Now, a traditional approach to using resources has been to focus on large, complicated, expensive, centralized projects and solutions. Personally, I feel while some of this was definitely warranted, but the kind of, the notion that the solution to our water security should essentially be completely centric on these kind of projects is, in my mind, a mistake. We instead need a far more nuanced approach to solving our problems in rural areas. And I personally believe that 4 key parameters need to be carefully considered while developing a solutions framework. What are these 4? First, using common sense, we must shift emphasis to capturing rain where it falls and closer to where water is actually going to be consumed. Given the best place to store it is below the ground, much greater emphasis needs to be on groundwater recharge. Second, given all of this, our focus must actually shift towards a far more decentralized system of water storage than a centralized one. Third, while doing so, planning must consider what resources already exist and build on rejuvenating them. I was intrigued by a question someone actually put up while one of the earlier speakers was speaking, which was exactly this. Fourth, our efforts must involve communities and ideally be done as movements involving states, communities, and NGOs and partners, and not just by one of them. Let me give you an example from the work that our foundation team has been doing to bring all of this alive. So in 2014, we started partnering with a network called Caring Friends to rejuvenate water bodies as a way to actually address agrarian distress. In the initial years, we focused on a few water bodies in Jalna district and Beed district, which has become actually the suicide capital of Maharashtra on account of acute water distress. Our initial work helped us fine-tune a model in which partnership with the local communities, we would desilt water bodies attached to villages whose water holding capacity had been impaired on account of siltation over many decades. As donors, we would simply contribute towards the excavation costs and process management costs of NGOs, while the community would bear the lion's cost of carting the silt away. The extracted amount of silt created equivalent water storage capacity above the ground, and often a multiple of it below on account of percolation. All very simple. The silt would turbocharge yield of farmers when spread on fields, 3 to 4 inches of it, and dramatically cut the cost of fertilizer. All of this leading to doubling or sometimes tripling of net income. The initial success of this model actually encouraged us to go and then work with the Maharashtra government to help shape what eventually became a statewide policy called GDGS, which eventually led to rejuvenating over 5,000 water bodies across the state. Now, last year, we actually successfully ran a program for NITI Aayog in 3 states and 6 aspirational districts. And the success of this is probably this year going to result in scaling this up between 5 and 10-fold. Now, when taken together with the Amrit Sarovar initiative, which was launched, this has the potential to at least impact 100,000 to 150,000 water bodies impacting nearly 200,000 villages in the country over the next 3 to 5 years. The cost of all of this would probably be less than 1,000 crores a year. Now, this is a great example of a partnership between governments, communities, and NGOs to address a very sticky societal problem. But importantly, this all happens very quickly and at a very, very low cost. Now, in the how-to, which is the second part, I would like to also talk about changing gears a little bit and how we can use new tools to both enhance scale and efficacy of the work we all do. Now, this includes use of technology, firstly. Now, when we first started doing our work, all our data collection was Excel-based and dashboards were prepared manually. Our entire program now works off multilingual apps with data feeds on cell phones, live decision-friendly dashboards for NGOs, donors, and governments. When we decided to work, initially, all the inputs were triangulated from ground and district administration. And now we are able to use sat maps, tools developed by a foundation, FES, that works on water to help prioritization. Second, and importantly, process. Over time, we have been able to templatize the process to both make it simple and have costs state by state. Importantly, we've been able to create a library of content, which is now being made multilingual to facilitate nationwide training. A lot of this has been inspired by the good work done by Pani Foundation in this area, and I appreciate their sharing their learning so we can actually scale ours. It's very good to see actually standards now emerge like the water governance standards, which have a very practical approach one can adopt. Its practical design starts by addressing India's long-standing water problems and provides a special collaborative solution through institutional and community development in equitably regulating the supply and demand for water. It provides a toolkit that suggests implementing a certification or rating system that encourages behavioral change in villages by helping people adopt water-smart attitudes and behaviors. This tool becomes pertinent because it addresses issues right at the base of the pyramid where problems are being most felt. WSG's core belief that community should be at the core of decision-making process is also something that we strongly believe in. For instance, in our work in Nasik, where farmers applied fertile silt excavated from water bodies in their farmland, we see their ability to now take a lot more cash crops. And correspondingly, we are seeing jump in average incomes of almost 200% to 100%. Also, the need to irrigate much lesser since silt actually holds soil for much longer. While ensuring that everyone has access to water is an important objective, long-term water management and conservation greatly depends on the community's ability to sustainably maintain its water resources through behavioral change. This is the most interesting aspect of WGS, and even more so to the work that we've been doing in the space of improving water security in drought-prone areas. It is one thing to be able to increase community water access, but quite another to ensure its availability over long term. And for that, you require this change, which both promotes judicious use of surface and groundwater resources. Ultimately, we have to move towards a model where every village in our nation must be able to create a water budget and ensures that they are water positive. Their local KVKS must connect farmers to knowledge and information that will help them switch from crops that are water inefficient but have high returns to crops that can be grown given their water availability and have high returns from livelihood perspective. And third, incentives such as current micro irrigation subsidies or energy subsidies will only be effective when this expertise is locally accessible. WGS has been actively tested in 3 states in a variety of contexts through many years of WOTR's active involvement in rural sector across 8 states. The results are actually unsurprising to many of us who have worked in the sector. Wherever efforts have been made to involve the community, its leadership and institutions by increasing awareness, developing skills, and encouraging attitudinal and behavioral change through enforcement of community mandated rules, the quality of water management and government performance have significantly improved. I believe that communities should be able to materially address their water security with this framework and the tools that are emerging. In areas where many of us work, the methodologies I spoke about will prove to be very useful. And I'm personally excited to see things evolve from here. I extend my congratulations to the entire WOTR and W-CReS team on this well-timed publication, which is the outcome of their in-depth primary research in various Indian states and synthesis of years of experience. Namaste.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Amit. That was really enlightening, and it's fantastic to see, some of the effects of the work that you have been doing in this space come through with, through collaboration. So the demonstration, so that you have been able to show, so of scalability of the solutions that your, so you and your teams and collaborators have been able to find. So thank you very much for that. And yes, absolutely, I think our sector needs much more collaborative efforts, and I'm sure we're going to have much more engagement in this space. Our next speaker is Dr. Mark Smith, who is the Director General of the International Water Management Institute. He was formerly the Deputy Director General Research and Development for the IWMI and brings more than 25 years of research and program management experience in water resources, agriculture, climate, and sustainability. He was director of the Global Water Program at the International Union for Conservation of Nature from 2008 for 10 years till 2018, where he led several multi-regional programs in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, addressing river basin management, transboundary cooperation, and water governance. In fact, IWMI again has the same basic principles of collaboration in the areas of water and land management, working and engaging communities, so in all the countries where it operates. I think you have operations in some 30 countries, Mark. And I think your strategy is innovative, scientifically tested water management solutions for sustainable development. Thank you very much, and over to you for your keynote address. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you so much, Malini, and thank you also to the inputs from the previous speakers. And really thank you for the invitation to contribute to the launch of this book. And I want to start also by congratulating the authors, what I've found to be a really interesting and compelling and innovative concept for the water governance standard. I'm going to try and share, I've got a few slides to share, so let me attempt to do that. So the perspective that I want to give you is not from, as we've heard, it's not from a business point of view or from a standard setting point of view. It's from just based on my experience of working with water governance in different parts of the world. And I hope that will be of interest to those gathered here today. So there's no doubt, I think, that in fact the needs have never been greater for water security, but also for water governance and making water governance more effective. There's no shortage of evidence for this from research and data, from different kinds of assessments, whether it's from the FAO or the recent IPCC report from last year. Those are slides, those graphics that you see on the screen are from the IPCC report, as well as just headlines that we see around the world showing that water risks and impacts from water insecurity, we see them in all sorts of different corners of the world. So water security is increasing, insecurity is increasing, excuse me. Climate change impacts are being felt in terms of droughts and floods and extreme events and other related events. There's more uncertainty. Planning and decision making is getting harder because climate change means that the past of water resource regimes is no longer a guide to future water resource availability and water risk. And that has really important implications for water management, but also the kind of governance that we need and the kind of capabilities that policies need and institutions need to be effective in water governance. So I would argue that our tolerance, our room for maneuver in putting up with poor water governance is in fact declining. We're not able to get away so easily with poor water governance now, and we will not be able to as the future unfolds. And so there are familiar challenges for water governance, as you see on the screen, delivering services, ensuring equality, protecting the resource, reliability of water, the productivity from water, infrastructure investment, and so on. But there are also new and emerging challenges for water governance, including dynamic risk because of climate change, because of that fact that the past no longer helps us so much with understanding the future. There is deep uncertainty, so uncertainty that threads its way through the whole system. There's increasing emphasis on restoration and especially on resilience as we look at that more uncertain future. So as a result, really the rate of improvement that we need in water governance, it has to accelerate. The threats that we see mean that we have to go further and we have to be able to do it faster. So personally, in the learning that I've had around working with water governance, I've always seen that water governance as a process of change management. And the basis for saying that is that there are very few countries or jurisdictions that set up water governance and set out to improve water governance in order to keep things the same. So intrinsic to it are processes of change. So then there is an implication that fundamentally we need water governance as we look at this more complex future. We need water governance that works to deliver change in a complex systems and becomes more effective in doing that. We have to become more effective in doing that. So I want to give some reflections on this core challenge, and then I'll conclude with reflections on the water governance standard, and you'll see how I think the water governance standard helps us potentially with this challenge of working with complexity in water governance. So my starting point here, and these my reflections here, my anecdotes, they're just very quick. My starting point here is a program that we ran in IUCN. Malini, you introduced my history with IUCN before I came to IMI. This was one of the programs that I led there was called Bridge, which is building river dialogues and building river dialogues and governance. And it was a program that started in 2011, and it's still going today. And it works in transboundary rivers, so river basins that are shared between countries. But the critical thing relevant to what we're talking about today is it used very much a multi-level water governance model for working with challenges across in shared basins. So it worked with interventions at very local levels as well as up to intergovernmental levels, and it worked across a set of basins in different parts of the world that you see indeed on the screen right now. So out of that, we learned a great deal from working across all of those different contexts about how it is that that governance works as a change process, in multi-scale, complex water challenges. And we created this schematic model that I just want to very quickly run you through. And it starts with the blue box. So the blue box it is about agreements. And fundamentally, water governance is about agreements, all sorts of different agreements. And they can be very local agreements, they can be very informal, they can be formal, they can be treaties between governments. But it's this coming together of many different kinds of agreements that gives you the fabric of water governance. So in our program, we worked on proactively supporting those processes of building agreements or building water governance. And we did that through the kinds of facilitation and cooperation that you see in the white box. And what we found that led you to, indicated by these little blue arrows, what that led you to was incremental steps. So steps forward in terms of new agreements, new activities, new interventions. So taking steps forward in making water governance more effective. But what we found, and I'll give a couple of examples to show this very quickly. What we found is that periodically, because different kinds of actors align and institutions combine across scales alongside external triggers, we found that every so often you get a big shift, a big step forward, a large jump forward in water governance and its arrangements and its effectiveness. So that really changed fundamentally the rules of the game. So a couple of examples then to show you. The first comes from one of those basins where we worked in the bridge program. This is the Catamayo-Chira basin, which is shared between Peru and Ecuador. And the situation here was that in the upland areas in Ecuador, there was land degradation, and that was creating a problem of sediment flowing down into Peru, where there were irrigation schemes that were producing high value products for export. So with facing this problem, local communities came together to plan joint action. So I think undertake the kind of actions that indeed the water governance standard is trying to incentivize. And this led to, in water governance terms, it led to the formation of a basin platform that brought together local governments as well as the provincial authorities. And then they undertook joint action on restoring the basin, overcoming the problems of land degradation, and also things like payments for ecosystem services to help incentivize investment in those actions. But the game-changing leap that then led to was that as the alignment of those local actors and the national actors came together, they used this to advocate for and to create a binational commission between Peru and Ecuador that oversees the governance, oversees the management of 9 basins shared by those 2 countries. So they went from very local action, triggering through this changes in governance, triggering through to the formation of a binational commission for all the basins that they shared, that was eventually launched by the presidents of the 2 countries. So small actions creating big shifts. The second example is from the Fergana Valley in Central Asia. This is work that IMI has done. And this shows a similar process and a similar sort of pattern of governance change, so that facilitation and cooperation activities locally, joint actions, information sharing, coming to local agreements, etc. Then with multi-level actors aligning and then triggering steps forward in governance in terms of institutional development, but also in terms of breakthrough in the context of Central Asia, breakthrough cooperation in terms of managing the water resources in the basins around this area. So then just to draw some conclusions and now make the link back to the water governance standard. Why do I think this is so relevant to the water governance standard? I see the water governance standard as a tool for activating change. So mobilizing the kinds of incremental steps forward in governance that we need, and doing so locally. And also really importantly, I think it gives a new kind of rationalization for private sector engagement, not just in water management, but in governance, in those kinds of agreements that I showed in the blue box. And therefore I see it has the potential for incentivizing actors to align in really new ways and introduce new drivers for those governance shifts, for those governance changes. And I think it's going to be very interesting as we gain experience, as you gain experience from applying the water governance standard, to then look at how that model for that change model that I presented for governance, to see how the water governance standard influences the way that works. So how it activates water governance change for the complex water challenges that there are no doubt you have in India, and the extent to which this then relates to incremental steps, and then how that triggers, how that local action, local alignment, how that triggers those larger shifts in governance that are going to be so critical for addressing the very complex water challenges that we face now, and that are growing more complex as we look into the future. And that's true of India, and it's true of many different parts of the world. So let me stop there. Sorry for the technical glitch in the middle, but I hope my storyline and my messages were clear enough to people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. And I think there's a common string that runs through all our keynote addresses, and I think there's one word which is really about collaboration. And I think the outcomes of all our efforts can only be magnified and amplified by collaboration with communities, with governments, with multiple partners and stakeholders. So thank you very much for that. Now, moving on to the next important stage of this webinar is really the launch of the water governance standard. And I'm going to invite Crispin to talk to us about, sort of the journey that he and his co-authors have, have walked to put this standard together. So there are three other authors along with Crispin. Crispin was the lead author, but there's Eshwer Kale, there's Mandir Sathe, and Rishu Garg, all of whom collaborated through a very tough time really in these last couple of years, and a rigorous process of testing, of consultation, of revision, and finally the beta version that you see now in the water governance standard. So it's really impressive the amount of arduous work that the team has put in to bring, sort of validation to these standards that they're advising and suggesting. So Crispin, without further ado, I'm going to invite you to tell us about the water governance standard. But before letting you speak, I'm going to share a little information about Crispin himself, who's a leader really in the space of so water in our country, watershed. Worked over 30 years in the area of water, environmental degradation, and the impacts of climate change have been the areas of his focus. He's co-founded 4 nonprofits, water being the first of those, Watershed Organization Trust. And other than that, sorry, the phone call came through, the Sampada Trust, the Sampada Entrepreneurship and Livelihood Foundation Self, the Sanjeevani Institute for Entrepreneurship and Development, and W-CReS, which is now run by Dr. Marcela D'Souza, who's also online with us. So these organizations together really, sort of are the backbone of water's work in Maharashtra and 9 other states now across the country, and some overseas projects as well. Crispin really successfully led this large-scale bilateral Indo-German watershed development program that is really at the root of water's work in India over these last 30 years. He's contributed to setting up 2 large national level public funds to promote watershed development. And Amit, I think it's very welcome you mentioned that, the government has really set aside a huge investment really in the water space, and has clear recognition of the effort of organizations such as Water and yourself that has, sort of brought, so much attention to this space now. Crispin has 12 books to his credit, several sort of publications as well, and the latest one is of course this water governance standard. So over to you, Crispin, to share with us this journey that you have walked along with your co-authors in putting this standard together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Malini. I'll be very brief. Basically, our organization, the one I'm associated with, the Watershed Organisation Trust, has been working in this space of water and watershed development, which basically organizes communities to capture rainwater wherever it falls across the landscapes and catchments or watersheds they live in, since the last 32 years, basically. And it grew out of a sense of frustration because despite working in over 1 million hectares directly and with our partners, we never really seemed to solve the water problem. Of course, water levels rose, people got more water, but demand always outstripped whatever we could do to get as much water as we could. It was never enough. And so we began to wonder, is it enough that we focus on capturing as much rainwater as possible, or harvesting as much storage capacity or stores of water, or stocks of water? And we realized it won't work. We need to look at the demand side, at the way we perceive and use water. In other words, the productivity or efficiency and efficient use of water. We needed to look more at the management, the demand management side of water. And then we began to wonder, how do we bring about behavioral change? Because at the heart of it is behavioral change. And hit upon this idea of using the standards and certification approach. Keep in mind that we drew inspiration for this from what was achieved in the credit sector, where for a long time, if you remember, credit was a very gray area with a lot of fears, a lot of risks, and it never really grew to meet the credit requirements of the people who wanted credit. Too many risks and too many unknowns. And then people developed a credit score, to check the credit worthiness of a person. And very soon after that, the sector experienced a huge boom, because basically what did the credit and rating system do? It basically uncovered risk. It put a figure to it. And based on that, then people could develop prudential norms, assessment norms, risk mitigation strategy. And once that was cleared, you see, once in a way sunlight entered the sector, then there was a massive inflow of credit into the sector, a large number of borrowers, a lot of financial resources available, and that sector grew enormously. Achieved by introducing a standard and a certification process, which resulted in a credit score. So we said, why don't we do it in the water sector too? So we developed then the water governance standard, which basically is a rating and certification methodology or a toolkit, which seeks to incentivize and nudge communities and investors alike by giving a water score to rural communities. Now, the communities, on the one hand, incentivizes them to adopt water smart attitudes and behaviors by linking progress in this regard, that is water smart attitudes and behaviors, to preferential access to investments and benefits. And on the other hand, the investors, to provide the required financial and technical resources to such communities that are displaying water responsible attitudes and behaviors. Now, the goal, therefore, of the standard is to catalyze competitive dynamics in rural communities, which uncover promising water investment opportunities that can deliver sustained benefits to communities and investors alike. Because, you know, the demand, as Amit was saying, a huge amount of money has been allocated by the government, 100,000 crores, which only underscores the fact that there is a huge demand for water infrastructure and water facilities in rural India. And the need for resources to meet that is humongous. So basically, can we use market principles to also fulfill that while also meeting basic needs of communities and recognizing the fact that water is a fundamental right and a common good? Now, the water governance standard basically evaluates how effectively rural communities manage and govern their available water resources and rates them at 4 levels. The bronze at the entry level, followed by silver, then gold, and finally platinum, which is the highest rank. Crucially, since the assessment process uncovers key areas in need of improvement, the water governance standard offers communities a pathway to improve their overall performance in regard to water management and governance. So it's done participatorily with the community. It doesn't just assign them a number. It involves them in assessing their own performance in regard to the governance and management of water across a graduated scale. And in the process, it uncovers risks. It uncovers areas that they need to improve upon to improve their performance in managing and governing water. It's built on 4 principles, 4 behavioral principles, basically. Namely, one can only manage what one measures. Secondly, people respond to incentives. Thirdly, behaviors that consistently result in positive experiences become habits. And lastly, nothing succeeds like success. Not only does it attract interest, it also attracts resources and replicators too. You can take something to scale if it's successful. Now, why do we believe that the water governance standard can change water-related behaviors? And that's because it attempts to converge the interests of 2 key actors in what I call the water markets, the de facto water markets that exist, namely the rural communities and the investors. Here, if you look at the consumer side of the market, are the rural communities, and they have huge demand for water infrastructure and resource development. And they are in need of investors or people who can provide that resources, be it from the private sector, be it private investors, social investors, or government, or whatever. These are investors or resource providers. And the demand for these resources far exceeds supply. That's the market analytical frame. The other side is because there is a huge, the investors on the other hand also have scarce resources. They want to have returns on investment, whether it's financial or even social returns. Whether the money comes back to them or not, it doesn't matter. Money is scarce, and if invested, should lead to results either to the beneficiary or to the investee or to the investor. But even if so, it need not be financial. So they want to be sure that if they invest in a project, in a water-related infrastructure, that's going to be successful. So they need to uncover the risks, and they need to also put in place guidelines or measures to mitigate the risk. See, so there's an interest on both sides. So basically, what the water governance standard does is it aims to meet the core concerns of both the stakeholders, opportunities for communities and choices for the investors. And therein lies its transformational potential. So basically, the Water Governance Standard builds on and catalyzes market dynamics, which I define as transactional wish fulfillment. So on both sides, for the giver and the receiver, to generate core benefits to communities, investors, and resource providers alike at scale. So what is its scope of application? This tool is best applied in areas, in villages and communities that are in what we call rain-dependent areas of India, which largely depend for sustenance and livelihoods on groundwater. It's not going to work directly in areas which are water surplus. However, it can also work in areas where there is assured water, but not more than 20 or 25%. But keep in mind that about 70% of India is rain dependent and groundwater dependent. So the applicability of this tool is enormous in the sense of vast areas of India largely depend on rain and groundwater, and therefore are an appropriate candidate for the application of this tool. It can be used by communities, can be used by investors, it can be used by research people and people who implement projects. A very quick overview. It rates communities at 4 levels: the bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. Platinum is the highest. And it's based on scoring across 4 modules. The first one being governance and institutions. The next is supply side management of water. Then the demand side management of water, and sustainability and equity. And these modules have a set of scores which together add up to 100. Now, if you notice those things, there is about 45 marks allocated for the supply side management, which begs the question. None of the others then can match this. So why is it having such a large number of marks, 45 out of 100? Well, the simple reason is the demand for water, the need for water is enormous in India, right? And you can't manage what you don't have. So supply management is also key. But you can only manage something effectively if you take care of the demand side aspects, as well as nature's requirements, as well as administration and governance and management of water, as well as equity. So the total sum of the other 3 components is about 55, which together is more than the supply side. On balance, it adds up to 100, and you get a fairly good idea of where communities then can be situated across these various ranking levels. We believe, in closing, that the Water Governance Standard is a work in progress. India has got infinite number of heterogeneous contexts. And so the tool has to be customized and tailored and weighted according to the local context and demand. And that's the reason why we have made it completely open. In the annexure, we have put down the entire tool with the scoring system, all of which can be changed by the user to suit the local context and local priorities. It's freely available. And we believe that the Water Governance Standard, if it's customized to local contexts, which eventually lead to certification of rural communities and a water score, it has the potential to transform India's rural water sector by incentivizing behavior change and creating the conditions for significant financial investment inflow into this sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Crispin, and congratulations on this huge body of work that you and the team have put together. And now, without further ado, I'd like to invite all the authors to come on screen, please. So Eshwer Kale, Mandar Sathe, Rishu Garg, please join Crispin for the launch of the book. Dr. Marcela D'Souza and Prakash Keskar, Executive Director of Water, may please also join, along with the panelists and the speakers. And now, I think there's a screen that's going to come up. And I'm going to request our keynote speakers to please press a button on your screens that will launch the book, which is going to be available for everyone immediately thereafter.
The water crisis in India is a pressing issue, affecting 600 million people with high to extreme water stress. Unfortunately, per capita availability of fresh water has decreased by 70% since independence, further worsened by the impacts of climate change. It is crucial that we take decisive action to conserve water resources for a sustainable future, both for ourselves and our natural ecosystems. We proudly present to you the Water Governance Standard, making water everybody's business. This book presents a transformational approach to water management and governance in rural India. Crafted through several years of research across diverse regions in India, this methodology offers a solution for rural communities to access, sustainably manage, and conserve water. Join us in this effort to create a water-secure future. Download your free copy of the Water Governance Standard by visiting www.wotr.org/WGS or scanning the QR code. For a hardcover copy, please reach out to us at publications@wotr.org. The time to act is now. Let us make water everybody's business.
Thank you very much, and congratulations to WOTR, to W-CReS, and the whole team for this fantastic effort. And now on to the third leg of this webinar, and we're running a little, a little late, so I won't take much time. But we've got our next moderator, in fact, is Dr. Alok Sikka, who's going to lead the panel discussion. That's coming up in the next, next minute, which is going to discuss towards a water smart rural India. And we've got some very interesting panelists, and I'm going to leave Dr. Sikka to introduce them. But they are Mr. Paul Rajarao, Royston Braganza, Eshwer Kale, and Jasmeer Dhingra. Now, just a brief introduction of Dr. Alok Sikka, and then over to you, Dr. Sikka. So he's the India representative of the India Water Management Institute. And he has been there for the last 6 years. Prior to that, he was the Deputy Director General of the India Council of Agricultural Research, the ICAR, and a technical expert on watershed developments at the National Rainfed Area Authority in the Planning Commission. He was Director of ICAR's Research Complex for Eastern Region in Patna and Basin Coordinator for the India Gangetic Basin under the CGIAR Challenge Program on Water and Food from 2002 to 2007. He has great experience in research, institution, and policy issues. He teaches and trains, in this area of natural resource management. And really, who better than he to lead this, to moderate this panel of experts that's going to discuss how we can make rural India water smart. So over to you, Dr. Sikka. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Malini. And first of all, to begin with, let me thank and congratulate the authors for really bringing out this book on the water governance standard, which is really very, very timely. And as the speakers have been talking about, and rightly so, Amit or Mark or Crispino and others, that besides supply side management, it is really the demand side management is very, very important. And that really requires a whole lot of community participation. And so there's no need for me to more and more underscore and highlight that. And when we are talking about that, in that kind of a situation, these kinds of water standards and the governance standards, because no matter how many good technologies you have, but unless there is a good governance standards and the practices, perhaps not going to really be done in the way it should be. So I think I'll not take further time. Maybe I'll see and give my comments towards the end of the session, depending on whatever the time. As Malini mentioned, of course, we are already running late. And as we already mentioned, that's really very, very close to my heart, this subject on water management, particularly in the rural sector. And when we are talking about this particular session is on towards a water smart rural India. And we know the crisis through which we are passing through, and in the future is looming large on that, that we need to really be much more smarter in handling our ag water management in the rural sector. So with that kind of thing, and then as you have already indicated that we have 4 panelists who are going to be talking about, they're sharing their own experiences towards water smart rural India. And of course, leaning on the kind of the book which has been released, which is very timely, as I already mentioned. So with this, I'll just start with the first panelist. But before I go further, let me also set the stage that each panelist will get about 4 to 5 minutes to speak, and I'll be just shooting out one question for each of them. Following that, we will have audience to keep asking their questions on the chat, and depending upon that, we'll come back to the audience and whatever the question they are asking after all the 4 panelists have spoken. So I think with this intro, let me invite the first panelist, as I see on my list, is Eshwer Kale. And Eshwer Kale is with the WOTR. He's a thematic lead for water resources development and governance with WTR. And he is also heading the Resilience Center for Studies. And he is PhD in groundwater governance. So I think there can be nobody better than him to be talking about the governance, particularly when we are talking about water management in the rural sector. Groundwater governance becomes really, really very, very important. And he is also a co-author of this water standard governance standard book, which has just been released. And so, Eshwer, I have a question for you, which we would like you to respond to. Is could you please share with us the insights you have gleaned from applying this WGS standards methodologies, and how it can improve water management and incentivize responsible water behavior in the rural communities? Because as you know, that's really behavioral change is very, very important when you're talking about the water smart rural areas water management. So over to you. You have 4 to 5 minutes. Thank you.
So to come to the straight question to the Alokji has said, I will just explain the little journey of this whole water governance standard. We started, I think, almost back to the 5-year in 2018, and where we just conceptualized and tested this in a very few villages. But after that, we have a number of testings and a lot of consultation with the different water experts, the practitioners, the CSOs, even the government officials. And throughout this whole consultation, there are a lot of inputs to develop this whole process. Even in, I think, 2020, December or January, actually, we had this whole national level consultation that where a lot of, I think the present people were available there. Actually, they also offered their comments, and this version 2 is based on these comments. So basically, this overall approach is tested in 94 villages across 3 states, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, and Maharashtra. And in this 94 villages, the result shows that 1 village came to the platinum level, that is the highest certification level, 6 at the gold, 10 at the silver, and 6 at the bronze. But it also showed that remaining 71 villages were not eligible, means their score was less than 50 onto the overall water score. So I will just share the one platinum village where that is a Maswandi into the Ahmednagar. So what made Maswandi to stood outstanding at platinum level? So that was our exploration to understand what processes went into that villages, which made the whole process at platinum level. So then we found that since 94, there was a lot of, or the blend of different projects from the government, non-government, and even this civil societies. For example, this whole Indo-German watershed project started there. Then again, this integrated water management program from the state took place there actually. Even the water stewardship initiative, the climate proofing projects by the NABARD. So there are a lot of investment which resulted in a wave of institutions to be formed there actually. And this wave of institutions was much more capable for building the cadre of the stewards, which were much more skilled, motivated, and taking initiative into this village. So this investment and capacity building had a very huge role we found there actually into bringing this at the platinum level. Even these rules made into the villages, because I think more than before 10 years, they made the rule of this ban on drilling bore wells into this village, and still they are following. So that's a huge difference that whole collective actions are making into the villages. So I think this whole investment capacity building has a huge role into bringing this village at this level. Then I'm just sharing few very key important observations we found into this whole the analysis. So basically, the villages which got this, basically the platinum, gold, silver type of high performance certifications. So that was quite enough to have bring the sense of pride and the confidence and the recognition for their good work, but also the motivation to continue this type of efforts into these villages. But what about the low performance villages, or which are ineligible for the certification? So this whole very objective diagnosis of this, what are the strength or the gray areas to work on that components, was very crucial to recognize them actually, to restore for their retrospection to improve on. So very few important observations we found was I think there are three major variations we could see into the water scores throughout the three states. One was at the regional level. For example, as I said that we took this 30 villages into the Jharkhand, but only one village was eligible for the bronze and all ineligible. At the same time in Madhya Pradesh, we had 34 villages and 2 having this bronze, and others were ineligible. But surprisingly, you will see that in Maharashtra, out of 30, 20 villages were eligible for this different type of certification. So this was a very interesting observation to understand then what made this state level variations actually. So there may be the different factors or the contributing the elements for that. But what we understand is basically the low investment may be one, the priority of the state and NGOs, even this, the presence of this national and international agencies into that may be the one reason. Another may be this low exposure and the even low the aspiration of the farmer communities into that. So there may be multiple reasons for that, this variation at the regional level. Also, we could see at different water scores within the village, because we could see at least in supply and demand side, the villages are performing better, but when it comes to the equity and the sustainability, the score is less. Even in reverse, there are few villages like this platinum village got the highest standard, but for the governance part, there are many other villages which are in gold and silver, they are performing better. So there are a lot of variation we could see into these villages. So another the factors we could see, because this data, evidences, proofs are very crucial for this making the understanding, marking this whole scoring system into that. But that's very poor on the ground level, we could see actually. Even this low literacy on the monitoring of groundwater, what aquifer literacy was seen into that. So last comment, I think we could also see there is a lot of this whole agroclimatic, hydrogeological, even social diversity, and the aspirations of the communities are very different to that. So considering this, as Crispino was rightly saying, that this whole approach of fixed size of shoes or tailored coat will not work, or the static approach will not work. Therefore, we are really honest that this version 1 has to be customized, make suitable to the regional context actually when it go to the replication at different level. But also we believe that the core schema or the 4 modules and the normative.
I'm sorry to say, because I think you are running already out of time.
Yeah, so that will remain the same. So I stop here, Alokji, and thank you for the time.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry because I have to keep with the time as well. So I'm sorry for that, but that's what my job is right now. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. And now I invite the next panelist. So Jasmeer Dhingra, she is the Director Programs with in India with the IDH, and she is managing the sector programs in most of the commercial crafts like cotton, tea, spices and textiles, and also looking across the landscapes, particularly in Central and South India. And of course, she's got a rich experience of working with that. And I know they are also working now, she's engaged with the regenerative agriculture. And she has a master's in the business administration. So the floor is yours now. And I have one small question for you. You know that you have been working with IDH for quite some time, and now you have been working on the value chains. So given your experience in working on the value chains, could you please share with us your thoughts and on how a certification system like this, which we have been talking about, would contribute to reducing the water footprints of value chains and accelerate the movement towards sustainable business and trade, because that's where IDH is pretty much involved in. So over to you, Jasmeer. You have 4 to 5 minutes for that.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Sikka. Maybe right at the outset, I can say that both as a partner to water and a funder to the water governance standard, we were just very happy to see a framework which can be applied for what we think is potentially transformational in how water can be really managed at scale. One of the key reasons for this was that right at the beginning, when it was set into concept, we saw that opportunity to link water governance to sustainable sourcing and trade, to landscape level investments, and potentially even to influence other market-driven voluntary sustainability standards in their water management principles. So there's a huge potential there for systems change through the governance standard that we are being presented with today. We were also really happy that in its design stage and through its readiness pilots, we were able to engage W-CReS in pilots in our own landscape programs in Madhya Pradesh as well. And maybe for a very quick background, in Madhya Pradesh, IDH convenes the regenerative production landscape. It's a multi-stakeholder coalition, a compact which brings together the State Department of Agriculture with 13 companies, with 4 CSO partners. Through that network, about over 50 FPOs and working across 9 districts. All of these partners together working on climate resilience and adaptation. And this group is growing. But most importantly, what the group is really doing is pooling in knowledge and also investments. Investments which come from the companies who have signed up, who are currently building projects on farmer capacity building, all on sustainable agricultural practices, looking at provision of services to, again, influence their sustainable sourcing, looking at government, who of course is bringing in their contributions through schemes and subsidies, and the CSOs, who then attract and deploy philanthropic capital, which is really as catalytic funding to this whole exercise. What the group does is work towards shared outcome targets. This is important because this is where all resources and efforts, get combined, and we're working towards the completion of one picture. Now, why I mention this is because even in signing up to this regenerative production landscape, we have the companies recognizing that at least in India, there is no regenerative agriculture without soil and water at its core. This is very different from how many parts of the world actually define or coin regen ag in particular. And the goals are twofold. One is, of course, securing livelihoods, building resilience for the communities. The second is also building that same resilience in agricultural supply chains, which actually then drive local economy and those livelihoods as well. So the water governance standard for us was that opportunity. It brought in a space to quantify both actions and outcomes towards planning, towards resourcing, incentivizing better water management. And this was obviously important to us because it's one of the 5 main impact areas for our landscape programs. Now, in the program, we work with many companies. For example, the likes of an IKEA, the likes of an ITC. These are companies who are known for their long-standing commitments to reducing their water footprint in their production regions, in their sourcing regions, no matter what crops they are sourcing, whether it's cotton, whether it's food grains, whether it's spices, and so on. But these companies are by and large few, the ones who have the ability to actually research, experiment, and then further reinvest and iterate how they should focus their water-focused investments in their supply chain. But the bigger question is for the rest of the critical mass, the rest of the businesses who are sourcing in these landscapes, big and small companies, how can we help them get there faster? Because they don't have as deep, sort of pockets as the larger companies. At the same time, they are also equally influenced or affected by the lack of resilience in that landscape. So in sort of to summarize there, I think what I like about the water governance standard is that it puts the community and the investment value proposition at the core. What it then does is brings a framework which focuses on a few things: the good governance, the demand supply management, the equity and the inclusion of communities. And this is a language that companies are more and more recognizing as important if they have to play in global markets and if they have to deal with more and more conscious shareholders, which is now the increasing demand for them. It allows companies to de-risk their supply chains. That is why it's important for them to engage with the water governance standard, because companies are sourcing from farmers, and these farmers are operating in highly uncertain, sort of circumstances. The water governance standard has the opportunity to give companies this framework which will show them how their investment will be deployed. It allows them to see the results of the application of investments and then take those decisions again and again repeatedly about how to invest in continuous improvement. And I think that's my last point, Dr. Sikka, is that in a multi-stakeholder partnership, it's not only the companies, it's the government, it's sort of other philanthropic capital. We can all pool in our resources. We can all take that decision on how to bring in grant, how to bring in schemes and subsidies, how to bring in financial investment, and apply it in the right, sort of aligned way. So these are some thoughts from my side about why it's important to business, but also I was trying to keep it crisp given in the time. So I will hand over back to you, Dr. Sikka.
Thank you very much, Jasmeer. I mean, I know that you're really smart and crisp on this is water smart rural India, and I think you have put forth your point. And of course, as everybody agrees that yes, community at the core, and of course the community at the core is really pretty much required when we are trying to have a water smart rural India, and that of course conveys most of it. So thank you very much and we'll come back to you when there are questions in the chat. And so the next I have the speaker, which is really very important because he deals with the money. He's a finance person. So I invite Ruston Braganza. Ruston Braganza is the CEO of Grameen Impact Investment Funds India with Grameen Capital. And he is a career banker. And he spent quite some time with dealing with the Citibank and assignments across consumer banking as well as the corporate banking. So that's kind of brings and I also see they're very outstanding CV, which I know that I'm not going to read it. But the one thing which really fascinated me to share with you that he has also been awarded the Global CSR Leadership Award by the World CSR Congress. So I think there could not have been a better panelist than you, particularly talk about that. So we welcome you to this particular session. And on now, what we have, we would like to have pick your mind on that, as you know, that we have been talking about this rating and scoring, like a water score and any other credit card rating or whatever the way you kind of put it up. That can this kind of rating communities with the water scores as it's being done, can it nudge on the one hand communities towards more equitable water governance, and as well on the other hand the investors to provide them the necessary financial resources to meet their water needs? Because as you know, because these kind of a scoring would also help either way. So we would definitely like to have your views on that. So over to you, Mr. Paganza.
So just to go straight to the 2 points you made, and you talked about, the opportunity that there is. I've just come in from one of the G20 events a couple of hours ago at the Geo Convention Center. And again, that was all around financing the SDGs, financing the green energy climate imperatives. So what we're seeing is really a huge opportunity of being able to really create a connect between the projects and the work and the mainstream capital. One of the things that we are hearing globally is this concept of blended finance. How do we bring different pools of capital to finance a single project? Could it be the private equity? Could it be the investor community? Can it be CSR? Can it be government funding? And each of these has different motivations. And therefore, this ability to create blended finance solutions is very critical. What I think Crispin and WOTR have been able to do is to really create a good mechanism. I like this bronze, silver, gold, platinum standards. It actually, and then the ability to measure, to track, and to score gives you a good way to measure impact and monetize impact. And so, I want to talk at it from 3 levels. A, the ability for us to look at the G20 presidency of India and build something that can be useful for the global South. The world is looking at India for innovation and new models of financial structuring, especially when it comes to financing the SDGs. We at Grameen Impact have created this unique product called the SDG Impact Bonds, where we provide funding to projects or enterprises working in the SDG space. So they could be companies in food security, they could be social enterprises in livelihoods, it could be social enterprises or projects in water and sanitation. And these are really tracked in terms of the impact they get. And based on the impact and outcomes, the coupon is decided or reduced to incentivize for the impact. So the first thing is, how do we create enabling models and structures that what has been developed for India can be taken to the global South? Because people are looking at funding opportunities, whether it's multilateral organizations, whether it is global philanthropy, or whether it is the private equity investors. So the first is product design and creating the right standards. The second is the ability for us to bring in new ways of treating and dealing with CSR. Can we use the CSR money to be able to provide a guarantee? And that would bring in new pools of capital. Today, a lot of the funding that we are seeing is either coming from philanthropic money or donor funding. Can we use that not as the source of funds to fund the project, but as a guarantee for new pools, new funds to come in to fund that project? And if the project is successful, if there is a repayment that happens, then to that extent, that guarantee could be used for other projects. So that again is a huge opportunity. The third, I would like to see the sort of the marriage between these projects in the community space and microfinance. You know, we tend to often reinvent the wheel. At Grameen, 2006, Grameen won the Nobel Peace Prize. 2007, we set up Grameen Capital in India. And as chair of the Indian Microfinance Network, when I finished my term there, we had reached 60 million households. Now, if you take even 5 members in a household, we're talking about a 300 million people reach. That ability to reach that masses, can we overlay that with a water scorecard, where each village, each district is actually getting mapped? The Prime Minister and the Finance Minister talked about the aspirational districts program, and now they're talking about a further nuanced approach to look at the aspirational districts. Each of these can be measured vis-a-vis the scorecard and can be incentivized and funded based on those projects. So really, it's important for us to see not what we are talking about here in the limited worldview of what can we do with this scorecard for India. But I'm challenging the group to say, what we've done here be used globally, especially in the global South? So how do we broad base what we've done? Second, how do we bring in foreign pools of capital, Indian government funding, corporate philanthropy, high net worth and other institutes to come together to fund these projects, not just philanthropy. Can philanthropy be the catalyzing guarantee that brings in new pools of capital? And finally, how do we use the outcomes, whether it is platinum or gold or silver or bronze, to be able to determine the cost of funding? Because just by measuring, it's not enough. If we are able to monetize the measurement and incentivize the measurement, then, India says that if you win a gold medal at the Olympics, then you get, a house or whatever else it is. So the same way, if some district gets gold standard or platinum standard, can we drive down, can we give them some benefit for that? And I think that is the way I would like to see this becoming something that everybody is using. That, I mean, I'm on the B20 task force, as well as the W20, as well as the T20 and the B20. I would like to take this and offer it to the G20 and say, use this scorecard across the developmental indicators, wherever you're working on goal 6, and use this so that funding can come into the sector. I'll stop there for the moment, but congratulations to Crispin and the team for this wonderful report.
Thank you very much, Rastan, and I think you have really made a very interesting point by saying that going beyond these standards and looking at the performance, but how do we use this thing for monetizing and incentivization? Because incentivization is really a crux of the thing when we are particularly in the sector of natural resource management. Because unless you are incentivized for saving the natural resource, so I think that's you really hit the nail on the head. So that's the one good thing. So thank you very much. And now I move on to the last but the very important panelist. In the name of, I invite Paul Rajarao. Paul Rajarao is founder, secretary, and the executive director of BIRDS. That stands for Bharat Integrated Rural Development Society. I think it's a pretty common name, which I'm sure quite a few have heard of this. And Paul Rajarao's organization BIRD is currently involved in a wide range of initiatives which are aimed at improving the lives of marginalized communities at large. And of course, besides that, there are many other good things which they are involved in, which I know that's a very long list of achievements which I won't be able to go through in a limited time. So welcome to you here, Mr. Rao.
So I'm really thankful for WOTR for giving us this opportunity to participate. And I'm also congratulating the authors the co-authors and authors was a very important book on water governance and standards, which was brought on timely for a useful for the entire country and especially the farmers. So, as Dr. Alok said, my name is Paul Rajarao. I'm representing an organization called BIRDS. It's an about 32 years old organization, but the last 20 years we are associated in the groundwater management and demand-side groundwater management system with the drought-prone districts of the combined Andhra Pradesh and about seven districts we worked, and within about 650 villages we worked within about 500,000 farmers, so 500,000 farmers we covered. So this project was called called AP-FAM, which is Andhra Pradesh Farmer Managed Groundwater System, which has been funded by Food and Agriculture Organization of United Nations through. It has been originally funded by Royal Netherlands Embassy and associated by several NGOs and the farmers, and especially the groundwater monitoring committees in the villages of 650. So I have many things to share, but I will limit for two important areas where I just wanted to cover where how we have built the capacities of the farmers to manage this groundwater, which is useful for saving their crops and then reducing the cost of cultivation and managing the adaptations towards the managing the groundwater system. So we have made a lot of modules, training modules to train the farmers, as well as we have built a network system called participatory hydrological monitoring, which is done with all the wells. We have done the census, the collection of all the wells available in 650 villages, and as well as we have made several observation wells according to the hydrological units. So these observation wells, the data is collected by the farmer volunteers. They do the static water level, pumping water level, and as well as we have established rain gauge stations, and of course stream gauge stations, and we have crop plans and crop adaptations. All these information in participatory hydrological monitoring we display in the center of the village, so that the farmers who are using the groundwater will have the cautious usage, and then as well as they change their usage of the groundwater. So this is basically the behavioral change and knowledge building project. So this is how this project has been worked very successfully, and we have the second component, which is on crop water budget. So the data collected during Kharif, the entire data used to estimate the groundwater available and usage for Rabi. So the farmers who are in stress for Rabi groundwater, the groundwater for Rabi, they take the judicious the steps to use and to overcome the stress and using of the groundwater. So especially their adaptation, their plans and adaptations are crucial to take decisions. So at wider, these GMCs like groundwater monitoring committees at hydrological unit level, every year, even now, even after 20 and about 18 to 20 years of this project is successfully, even now the farmers are doing crop water budget, and as well as continuously doing their efforts on participatory hydrological monitoring. So we have demystified science, and I have several things like farmer water schools and FFS systems and all, but I'm not going much too deep. So this is how we have demystified the science and gave the tools into the hands of the farmers to run this project, and as well as this is their own, the water is their own resources. So they treat it as a common resource property in the village. So that is how this project was very successful, and the government of India, the government of Andhra Pradesh, and several states and several governments in India and in other countries have been used successfully in this project, the methodology, as well as the World Bank made a study, and CGWB, WB, and the NGRA and many research organizations and universities have developed some of the resource kits, and then as well as the project experiences, which was been very successfully implemented. So because of the time constraint, I stop here. If anyone has any questions in deep, I can able to give the more details to the audience. Thank you so much, Alok.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rao, for being pretty much keeping with the time as well and giving your experiences, also taking an example, I believe, from APFMS, which is really, I mean, widely quoted and widely appreciated example. So I think with this now we come to the round of the question that we have had for the panelists, and the next is that we'll have maybe not more than 10 minutes, perhaps. Then maybe Crispino can correct me if we can have more than 10 minutes, because I think we are already running over time. So the questions, as I said earlier, that the learned audience to put their questions on the chat or on the this thing Q&A. There have been bunch of questions, I think, that they have put it on my direct message.
Yes.
And one thing which I think it is a question to Eshwer, that the Maharashtra has a Groundwater Management and Development Act, and so he wants to know that according to you, what is the reason that or the challenges that why it is not being implemented? So I know it's a kind of a more general question, but if you can throw any light on that, Eshwer.
Quick response to that, we could see actually the different provisions it has on this ban on or the limiting the depth of boreholes and the some type of levy on the deep boreholes actually for that. So we could see that people are little aware about this law, and they are making their rules and regulation in accordance of this law. But still there is a lot of improvement needed into the coordination between the agencies actually for that law, like MWRRA and GSDA, because the rules of this law is still in a draft mode. So I think at higher level, the coordination is required, but people are more aware about this law. Still, it is not in an enforceable manner on the ground. So that is my response.
The other thing which I see, which is there in the chat as well as in the Q&A section is, I mean, people asking about this rating, because they feel that even the world level credit rating agency like CIBIL score is ignored, and how and what do we think that the water governance standards, this kind of rating will not be questioned or compromised in time to come?
Okay, I'll take that.
This question they are putting specifically to Mr. Braganza. Mr. Braganza, you are there?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of weightage being given to ratings. Something like this would give tremendous comfort to investors. But as a standalone, rating, the viability of the project would be most important. So it depends on the quality of the investor. If it is a donor investor, then they are looking for a social return. This may stack up. But if it's a commercial investor, then the viability of the project would also have to be done. So just a pure water rating may not be enough. That you will need a combination depending on the type of investor you're looking at. I also want to use this opportunity to take one of the questions on the chat, which was around water credits. Because this is something that just an hour ago we were discussing. Does India need to develop a carbon market and a carbon futures market in the G20 session? And there is no reason why we should also not be looking at waters, providing credit, which could be then traded and then bringing in new funding based on a scoring model that we've just developed. So someone needs to take the charge of, saying this is an area that we need to work on. I'm happy to work on funding some of the, projects which roll out based on this, as long as we find a guarantee together that would be able to start it off. And we can even showcase it to the G20, as one of the viable models that can be scaled up. That could be one tangible outcome of this event. Thank you.
I think that was the question, the next I was going to put up to all of you, but well, that you have already said, because water credits, because now again, see, my take is that even the carbon credits particularly in the few sectors where we have a strong measurements and monitoring, it works. But there are a number of sectors, including agriculture, where it's kind of very difficult to really even measure and then monetize the carbon credits. And water credits are going to be still more challenging because there are hardly any measurements of the water being done. Although now the government of India has recently set up a Bureau of Water Use Efficiency, and once that goes forward in its right earnest, because I've been also made the chairman of the task force of trying to decide how the National Bureau of Water Use Efficiency, what's the roadmap. So perhaps, of course, we should be more futuristic thinking, and of course, we should keep thinking that perhaps water credits will come in a day or two or sometimes. And I think that's something that perhaps what this governance standards have made a beginning towards that direction, that we can definitely try and aspire and look forward that how best we can come with the water credits. Of course, in a more simpler way, with a more simplified kind of instruments of monitoring and measuring. So that's something is really much more needed as we go forward. Another interesting question is, of course, I mean, any one of you in the panel could really talk about that. What is the role of PRIs, Panchayati Raj institutions, in water governance? Are they taking ownership? And particularly, I think when we are talking in this context, ownership of this kind of rating and performance rating and gold, silver, bronze, or things like that. So, in any takeoff for that particular question, Eshwer, you can talk about that.
I just want to share, Alok, if you permit.
Sure.
Yeah, in AP-FAMS project, the PRI institutions are the part of the GMCs. So they are well boarded in the project, and as well as they are taken a key role to safeguard and rescue the farmers who have a suicidal tendencies, because the short of groundwater for their sustaining crops. So in that situation, the Panchayat institution's role is very well taken in this project, which is successfully done. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Rao, you are right, because as a matter of fact, all the guidelines they talk about, and of course taking the lead from APFMS and many other projects of Sukhamadri and many other projects, Ivere Bazaar and whatnot. But of course it is there, but we also know that the kind of maybe it's not so the case everywhere, but of course it is pretty much there even in the guidelines, but of course challenging as well to kind of make it universally happening in the same way as is happening in APFMS or any other good projects. So then I have congratulations and of course so I think so this is one thing, and again I see a final last question is that can you elaborate experience in the water credit pilot is done in India? So I think Eshwer, perhaps you can share your views because you have kind of piloted it in 3 states. So is Eshwer there?
Yeah, Alok, maybe I can answer that. The question is about water credits, right? Monetizing water credits.
No, not the monetizing water credit. It says like experience, like they would like to know, that the piloting is done in India because you did the piloting in 3 states, right? And
water governance standard, yes.
Yeah. So that is what they're telling about that thing, that experience in the water credit piloting in India. So that's something, of course. So you can throw some light on that. Yes, Crispino.
Yes, so that was a very interesting experience because the 3 different states have very different agroclimatic and socio-political as well as hydrogeological contexts. And it was clearly observed that where people are more aware and have been exposed to more inputs of social mobilization, social capital building, as well as new technologies and new ways of looking at things, they have been able to adopt new technologies and even new forms of social organization to implement measures to actually manage excess as well as use of water. And depending on what level they are at, the level of organization and understanding and willingness to adopt new ways of doing things and seeing things, they were able to graduate higher along the water governance standard scale. So from bronze, they went to silver, silver to gold, and gold to platinum.
All right, so that's it. And I once again thank all the panelists. And before we thank further, I'll not take much time because I'm not going to make any long speech or going to make any kind of a conclusion. But let me mention to you that really this kind of an exercise which you have brought into this book on water governance standard, which is as a measure to rate and evaluate water governance by the rural communities, it's really a move in the right direction. And as others have been talking about, even in the questions, and you have done it tested it in 3 states. I think let's take cue from here and see that how best it can be further piloted in the rest of the areas, so that would give us a kind of the more feedback coming forward in our way to try and see how best those feedbacks could be internalized to make it even much more kind of foolproof if there are any issues coming up from any other states. And as you mentioned that 45% is for the supply side and 55% demand side plus other social things. Of course, I do agree. If I were at your place, I would perhaps give even more than 55% to demand side. But nevertheless, it's okay, I think. And we can always try and look into that. And I think there were quite a few good suggestions which came up, and that it is really a good measure of performance of how the kind of the projects and the systems are performing. And besides that, it is, as we are talking about, that it can be used also as a tool once it is monetized and also for incentivizing. Because if somebody is performing far more better, can we have some kind of incentive and reward system for that? So that's another kind of a way that we can really thinking about. Because as we know that particularly when we're talking about the water conservation or any kind of natural resource conservation, because if I'm conserving, the next door neighbor is not conserving, particularly when we're talking about the groundwater, then everybody feels, why should I conserve and my next door neighbor is pulling and sucking all the water which I'm conserving? So that's kind of a thing that we have to really look into. And as was being talked about, that credit scoring and water credits like on the lines of the carbon credits, but those are the kind of thinking that we can really look into. And maybe that when I'm going to start the first meeting of which I'm going to chair for this newly established task force on water use, Bureau of Water Use Efficiency, where we have a task with also the water footprints and other things. But these are the kind of some of the ideas we can also try and trial away with that. So that's kind of thinking which I have. So I think, as I said, because we have already run out of time by 27 minutes, so I'll not go further. And with this few words, let me thank all the panelists and all the learned audience who have shared their and asked their questions and shared their views. I know there have been few more on this which are more general in nature. I would not like to go into those. So with this, over to you, Malini, and to Crispino.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alok. That was a very, very energetic session, and lots of questions and thoughts have come through. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of action that will flow from these discussions. So Crispin, before we close, and thank you to all the participants for staying on. And I can see that there are a lot of people still online. So please don't go away for the next couple of minutes. Crispin, just a short wrap up on what you see as the way forward post the launch of this book, and sort of how we can progress from here.
Thank you very much, Malini, and thanks to also all of you who have still continued on this session. Going forward, we have already uploaded the e-version of the book. It's freely downloadable. The URL has been given in the chat box. Whoever wants a hard copy, please write to us and we'll be happy to send it to you. Also, we'll be organizing training programs, 2 types of modules. One is for the practitioners who want to conduct actually and use the water governance standard to rate and certify their rural communities, or to even evaluate and assess their projects. And the other one is for investors who want to use it to assess and see which is a good investing opportunity for them, and what is the safeguards or remedial action plan that should be developed where communities have to improve their performance on the water governance standard. That's available. Thirdly, we would also be willing and open to taking up to supporting companies or groups or NGOs in actually undertaking an assessment of their communities that are concerned with water infrastructure and want resources or investments in them. And lastly, anybody needs to customize the tool because it has to be customized for local situations. We would be willing to help those groups in customizing it. Yeah.
Thank you, Crispin, and thank you all again for participants for staying on. We've had quite a number of participants through the sessions. They've been very, very rich discussions, lots of new ideas that have come up, and we'll take these forward. We've got the names of the people who've registered. If you have any questions further to this, please do get back in touch with us, and look forward to working together with you and hearing from you again. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to all our keynote speakers, and to the teams again, to WOTR and W-CReS for all the fantastic work that has gone into putting this publication together. Thank you very much.